Welcome everyone, Costin here with a discussion about even more fun campaigns in Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires. I've talked about which campaigns I think are the most fun in the game, another set of campaigns that I think are also fun, and then there's this list. So to start this list off, we have Alith Anar's campaign for the High Elves. Now, the High Elves are a pretty powerful race, and Alith Anar is certainly a really formidable legendary lord. He does have a really good skill line that increases your missile strength by 12% faction-wide, though this does make him unpopular with his fellow High Elves. He also has two very significant benefits. He has an underway through the Shadow Realms, and his default movement stance is an ambush stance, with a minus 15% ambush success chance, so it's not going to be as successful as a proper ambush, but his default movement can give you a chance of ambushing your enemy. Now, why do I think this particular campaign is actually one of the best, if not the best campaign in the entire game? Well, it does start out pretty easy, actually, because you do have the ability of recruiting Shadow Warriors and Shadow Walkers from the very beginning, and the enemies that you have in your immediate surroundings, being Karankar or Silostra over here, they're not really much to speak of, certainly not against the range firepower that you do have at your disposal. Like the Shadow Walkers and Shadow Warriors, very substantially powerful units. But here's the thing about Alith Anar's campaign, and what makes it really fun to actually play. To the north, you have Hellebrand, who's almost certainly going to declare war on you, and to the northwest, we have Malekith, who once he's finished with Grombrindal, he's gonna come after you. And then you've got Valkia, or Sigvald. Typically, Valkia and Sigvald will end up in a war with one another, and actually Sigvald generally tends to win and take control over a vast swath of territory over here. So you've got four powerful legendary lords to the north of you, which you're going to have to deal with one way or another. You also have Tarax to the west, and even Kotep. And one shouldn't underestimate Kotep, because while he isn't really one of the more powerful legendary lords of the Tomb Kings, he does have a great deal of army power. It is quite something to see full stacks of Tomb Kings bearing down on your territory, and he also has really powerful artillery available. I mean, his mount is actually an artillery piece, and certainly one of the best in the game, actually. So there is a great deal of power for the factions that surround you. And to the east, you have Be'lakor, and Be'lakor is like is a constant harasser for every faction that he shares a border with. So if you're playing the High Elves in Ulthuan, he's going to harass you in Ulthuan. If you're playing Luin, he's going to harass you there. So if you're playing as Alith Anar, you can expect naval invasions constantly from Be'lakor, as well as his Norscan vassal. So that's the kind of situation. This is the kind of campaign that ramps up in difficulty the more you play it, because the more you play it, the more legendary lords you encounter, the more foes you encounter, the worse it gets and gets. So you're always constantly having to balance it out. Now, what I like about this campaign is you do have a lot of power. This is not one of those horrible campaigns where you're playing a weak faction and you're surrounded by enemies and somehow you have to survive it. No, this is a campaign where you have a powerful legendary lord for a powerful race with a great deal of strength, but you're also dealing with powerful foes. And I think this kind of campaign should be, in a lot of ways, the standard of what the campaign should be in Total War. A campaign that may start out easily, but ramps up in difficulty as you progress it, but you always have the tools necessary to deal with those enemies. That's what I really like about this campaign. It's been a joy to play it on my own. I've done a whole playthrough of this campaign. It is a joy to play through Alith Anar's campaign. He certainly has a lot of power with his underway and his ambush stance during the course of his campaign, as well as the assassination missions that he does have access to as well. Now, the second campaign to talk about is Gor-Rok. Gor-Rok is a powerful legendary lord from a survival perspective. If we look at himself, he gets 15% unit mass for his army, 10% missile resistance for his entire army, and he personally has a great deal of durability available to himself as a legendary lord. he does get physical resistance, melee defense, physical resistance for Saurus units, as well as melee defense for Saurus and Temple Guard. He gets passive ability, merely a flesh wound, so he gets melee attack, leadership, and unbreakable when his HP is less than 50%. He causes terror, and he also has regeneration and a battle healing cap of 100%. On top of that, he also has an armor that gives him a great deal of armor, a ridiculous amount of armor. The ward save would probably be really welcome, but still, it is a pretty good piece of equipment. And then he also has a mace that gives him 18% physical resistance. So Gor-Rok is the kind of guy you can throw right in the middle of an enemy army and he'll survive it. He won't necessarily do a lot of damage in the middle of the army, but you do have certain alternatives to do damage when you're playing as him. Now, most Lizardmen campaigns can feel very bland. Oxyotl is the major exception, but Gor-Rok is the other one as well. Because Gor-Rok has a walking nuclear weapon from the very start of his campaign. Now, Lord Kroak is an incredibly powerful hero, probably the very best hero in the game. And you start with him as Gor-Rok, so you get to utilize him far more than other Lizardmen Legendary Lords do, because for most other Lizardmen Legendary Lords, by the time they get Lord Kroak, they've kind of won the campaign or they've achieved a significant amount of success. And the battle to unlock Lord Kroak is not necessarily the easiest one or the fastest one to do in the game. So you have a Legendary Lord with a great deal of durability, and then you have Lord Kroak, who's capable of dishing out enormous amount of damage in an AoE. So Lord Kroak is insane. He starts with all of these items. Now, these items give you a lot of benefits for both Kroak and also the Lord that accompanies him, including casualty replenishment. Now, the way Kroak works is that he has these free spells, but they're basically the same thing. The Deliverance of Itza, rank 1, 2, and 3, which you can also upgrade. And these do a tremendous amount of damage to the units they catch in the fight. But on top of that, what's also really beneficial for Lord Kroak is he causes terror, he has control, regeneration, he has barrier replenishment, winds of magic benefits, and also very crucially for the Lizardmen, because this can actually be a major issue in their campaign, he can give you replenishment to Gor-Rok's army from the very start of your campaign. This is actually a major issue because Lizardmen do usually have a replenishment problem. Well, having Lord Kroak from the very start means that you can have a good amount of replenishment in your campaign. You can either improve this even further by getting a Skink Chief in Gor-Rok's army, or freeing that Skink Chief, that first Skink Chief, because you need the tier 3 settlement to increase capacity, freeing that first Skink Chief to actually go play his role in a second army during the course of your campaign. So you have a lot of campaign power just because you have Lord Kroak, who gives you replenishment for your main army and a great deal of benefits for your main army as well. He also gives you growth, which is always great to have, leadership, all that kind of good stuff that you do have with him. So a great deal of power, a great deal of strength when we're thinking about Lord Kroak over there and the benefits he does provide in this campaign. Gor-Rok and Kroak, just an incredible, powerful campaign duo. And it's actually just fun to nuke your enemies. I mean, just ask anyone who's played Ikit Claw. That's kind of how it feels to play as Gor-Rok. Actually, it feels better right now because Ikit Claw has a lot of issues with the gunpowder units. You don't have that issue with Saurus. That's certainly the case. Also, what's great is you can give barrier to Saurus, which are already very durable units. Just basically make them immune to damage. Why not? Become invincible. You're really the most powerful faction in this entire area, probably in the entirety of Lustria, actually, when we think about it. Well, if we're not counting Morathia as being part of Lustria. But still, you are probably one of the most powerful factions in Lustria, and you can certainly win this entire campaign. But what makes this campaign fun is you have a lot of choices of where to go, because Lustria is a pretty interesting area of the game as it currently stands in Immortal Empires. Lots of paths, lots of choices, lots of decisions to be made, a large swath of territory, and you can approach it in a lot of different ways. So how you choose to expand across Lustria is also going to be something that makes your campaign a lot of fun, and certainly a more dynamic campaign than you might necessarily expect, because a lot of campaigns can feel pretty stale and linear, whereas if you're playing something like Gor-Rok's campaign, since you start literally in the middle of Lustria, you're going to have a lot of choices to make during the course of this campaign. I mean, sure, you'll want to eliminate these Nurglings, but then what do you do? Do you go after Lord Skrull? Do you go after the Skaven? How do you approach Luthor Harkon? How do you approach Rakarth, who you're going to have to deal with one way or another? How do you deal with Alberic over here? And how do you deal with Marcus Wolfhard? Do you rush to try and save Mazdamundi, or do you go south to maybe help Axiatl against Kairos? Because you do have those kind of choices during the course of the campaign. So I think this is a really fun and interesting campaign to be had. You have a really powerful start. You also have a lot of choices to be made. And just having Lord Kroak eliminates quite a lot of the annoyances that Lizardmen experience early on, especially because of the poor casualty replenishment that they do have during the course of their early game, usually. The third campaign on this list is, of course, Ikit Claw of Skaven Blight of Clan Scryer. Ikit Claw has been a beloved legendary lord ever since he was introduced in Warhammer 2, and that's because it's always fun to just build nuclear weapons and unleash them on the enemy, and that really is how you sum up Ikit Claw's campaign. Now, he does have some issues. One of the big ones actually is in relation to gunpowder units, because Ikit Claw is supposed to be focused on getting a lot of Warplock Jezzails and Rattling Gunners. Well, that doesn't work very well within the context of Warhammer 3. One, because gunpowder units don't work very well even on open fields, and two, you have a lot of siege battles, and these kind of units are going to be really bad in terms of winning siege battles. So, not really worth massing a lot of these guys. A couple of them, 2 free Jezzails, 2 Rattling Gunners, all that will certainly work. They'll be useful in a lot of situations. But generally speaking, if you're playing the Skaven, you want to go with the Hidden Lair, get Gutter Runners, Night Runners, all that kind of stuff during the course of your campaign. Now, the second issue, of course, is an Ikit Claw's campaign is his starting position. But my advice, if you want to enjoy this campaign, is what you do is you come over here. I'm just going to set this to easy. You should probably play these manually or do what I just did here, which is set the battle difficulty to easy for the first few turns. And what you do is you come here into Barrow and you just sack the settlement. You wait until Sartosa marches on the capital of Tylia, and then you take advantage to wipe both of them out, take over Tyria, take over Sartosa, and then march and take over the entirety of Araby, Camry, and all that. And then you can have a really fun campaign, as opposed to focusing too much on your starting position and ending up in that never-ending war with the Wood Elves and Belagar and other factions, which isn't necessarily a fun experience. So you can certainly go for that if that's something you do enjoy during the course of your campaign. But I do think that the best approach to this campaign is to, just sack the Barrow, wait for Sartosa to basically give you Tylia on a silver platter after they lay siege to the capital. When they lay siege, attack Sartosa, let the Tylian garrison wipe itself out, then take over the capital after you defeated Sartosa in the battle, and then, take Sartosa, go against Rapance, go against Arkan, take the Great Desert of Araby, take over this entire territory, and you'll have a strong economic support for your entire faction. And then you have a lot of choices. You can go over to Lustria to try and help Lord Skrull. You can try and help Queek to survive, because generally speaking, the Skaven Legendary Lords, at least on Legendary, tend to get wiped out very quickly. So you can help, not necessarily very quickly, some of them can be, but they do tend to lose their campaign. So as Ikit Claw, your long-term campaign objective should be to try and save some of these Legendary Lords, or use a mod to give you defeated Legendary Lords, so when they do get defeated, you can get them part of your factions, because otherwise you just have to go to their initial starting location and just spark a rebellion and let that rebellion take the territory. It is an annoying mechanic how you gain defeated Legendary Lords through vanilla. So just doing it through a mod is simpler. Or you can, try and confederate them diplomatically, because you do have the tools necessary and you do have the start position that is suited for that. You won't gain Snitch necessarily before he's defeated, or Fraught, but you certainly can gain Queek and Scroll, and certainly that is a good amount of campaign potential. There's a lot of flexibility with this campaign start, actually. It can feel frustrating until you realize what you need to do. But it is a fun campaign, is a fun Legendary Lord, and I think Ikit Claw probably embodies what we view the Skaven as the best. Speaking about Sartosa, they are also a pretty fun campaign. If you do decide to play any of the Vampire Coast campaigns, I would recommend Sartosa. The reason behind this is because the Vampire Coast in general suffers from units with very weak armor and very weak leadership. Well, Sartosa does go a long way towards dealing with those issues and actually making a Vampire Coast campaign fun. See, the Vampire Coast does have some things going for them, or actually quite a few things going for them. They can get artillery, mortars from tier 2, gun carronades from tier 3. So they have a way of dealing a lot of damage in battles when the AI is not cheating and avoiding those dodging those shots. And they have a very effective way of taking down wolves. They also have really strong hero choices, specifically with the Morgul Hunters being really effective in battle. So they do have benefits, and the Vampire Coast can also earn probably one of the highest amounts of income from sacking settlements. Now, where Sartosa comes in is Sartosa earns more money from sacking settlements than the other Legendary Lords of the Vampire Coast. So that is a substantial benefit to begin with. Your economy is probably going to be the strongest because of that. Sartosa itself as a settlement is extremely valuable because it gives you a lot of unique buildings that are very useful to have. Specifically, the Peg Street pawn shop gives you a bunch of trade resources. You do have an orchard for wine production, and it's a relatively safe settlement with a pretty powerful garrison to have. But on top of that, Sartosa also has some really nice benefits, because from every port they can recruit at tier 1, they can recruit Sartosa Free Company, as well as Sartosa Militia. Now, Militia I probably wouldn't bother too much, though they're pretty much the ranged version of the Sartosa Free Company. They just have a pistol that they use as well. Not really worth it, though, from my perspective. But the Sartosa Free Company, they're a unit with decent leadership, higher armor than many of the units in the Vampire Coast roster, and pretty effective melee stats when we actually look at them. Though Aranessa herself, bear in mind, actually does buff them up. So these guys can be pretty effective melee units in a battle early on during the course of your campaign. So that is actually a pretty substantial change for the Vampire Coast, because generally speaking, they have weak range units. Their melee units are not even worth considering unless we're talking about Depth Guard. But suddenly you have a faction that has access to pretty effective early game melee units, and it only gets better from there. See, you also get access at tier 3 ports if you own the Ogre Kingdoms DLC. I believe that's the prerequisite for this, but you get access to Man-Eaters. Now, this is where things get fun, because actually playing Ogre campaign, generally speaking, going for Man-Eaters is not necessarily worth it, because if you're playing as Greases, you want Iron Guts. If you're playing as Crag, you want Gorgers. So you're usually not going to go for Man-Eaters, but Man-Eaters do pack a heavy punch. They might be a pretty expensive units, but you will have the money playing as the Vampire Coast, and you can have a really effective and deadly melee line between the Free Company, the Man-Eaters, the Gunpowder units, whichever ones you want to use. You can go with Grenadiers if you want. The artillery units. So you can have a lot of power during this campaign and really make a Vampire Coast army, dare I say it, fun. And then you, of course, have the other mechanics that you do have playing as the Vampire Coast in general. My advice, though, in this campaign, as with Ikit Claw, is yes, you do want to take Tylea. Maybe make an alliance with Ikit Claw if you're playing as Sartosa, because that can actually really work out in your favor during the course of this campaign. Make an alliance with Ikit Claw, take over Tylea, and then once you've gotten Tylea, head on off to Araby, conquer it, as you would if you're playing Ikit Claw. Conquer Araby, maybe make a deal with the dwarves, or just wipe them out. Take out Rapance, take out Arkan, take the Great Desert of Araby, maybe the Crack Land, and then at that point you might want to stop. Or you could just keep on conquering, because a lot of the terrain here is actually really suitable in the south. You could conquer the entire south. Though whether or not you want to meet Kairos Fate Weaver during the course of your campaign is up to you. So you do have a lot of choices. Of course, you do have the frustration that can come from fighting a war in the north, but fighting a war in the south can be really fun. You can also decide to invade Lustria, though one of your campaign goals, if we look at it, is to kill Noctilus. Though, to be fair, Noctilus is going to die eventually because Ulf 1 is going to kill him. The Vampire Coast does struggle because of their poor auto-resolve situation, so if you're playing a campaign as them, you're probably going to end up fighting a lot more battles than you might wish. Though, to be quite blunt about it, Aranessa is much better in that respect than any other Legendary Lord of the Vampire Coast, because she can have some pretty decently armored units. It's not going to be the best situation in the campaign, but it's certainly a heck of a lot better than what Noctilus has to deal with. Playing the campaign as him, I pretty much had to fight the vast majority of the battles, like 90% of the battles during the course of the campaign, because otherwise I was taking ridiculous casualties. That's not so much of a problem as Aranessa. A good campaign, pretty interesting Legendary Lord from the lore perspective as well, because she's not a vampire, she's not undead, she's actually a mermaid born to Norscan parents and favored by the god of the sea. Yeah, kind of weird character actually when we think about it. Finally, the last campaign I want to talk about and include on this list is, of course, Be'lakor's campaign. It would be remiss if I didn't include it on a list like this, because I think Be'lakor's campaign, as opposed to many of the Warriors of Chaos campaigns, which can feel pretty dull actually, he does have a pretty fun and interesting campaign, regardless of how you play it. Sure, you do have to take a couple of Dark Fortresses early on in the campaign, but then you have a great deal of flexibility. So by default, in Albion, you start with the potential of getting 2 vassals. The Norscans over here, which are tied to this Dark Fortress, as well as this minor faction of Tzeentch. So you're going to have a really strong and secure starting position. But on top of that, you do have a really good campaign starting position with a lot of flexibility during the course of this campaign. Do you want to go into Ulfon? You can do so pretty early on. Do you want to go in Bretonnia and the Empire? You can do so. Do you want to go in Nagarond? Do you want to go in Norska? Do you want to go in the Northern Castways? You can do so. And you have a lot of flexibility on the campaign because of the various portals that you do have. You start with one, a Shadow Rift, and you also start with one over here in the middle of the Empire. So if you want to invade the Empire from, like, deep in the Empire, go for Sylvania and knock some heads with Draika and Vlad, you can do so. Or you can head all the way down south over here in the Southern Castways and conquer both Oxyatl and Kairos Fate Weaver. So you do have a great deal of flexibility and power during the course of this campaign. On top of that, Be'lakor is also the only legendary lord of the Warriors of Chaos that doesn't have limits on the gifts of Chaos. So you can get as many gifted units in his army. What does this mean in actual practice? It means he can make a full-on demonic army, or he can make full-on demonic armies. He's actually a better demon faction than all of the other demonic factions combined. He has a more powerful economy, much better campaign mechanics than any of those other bastards, much better armies, much better economy. He also has an upkeep benefit just to twist the sword in even further, so you can afford more demonic units than any of them, and he has easier access to them, of course, through the gifts of chaos. So there is a great deal of power when it comes to that, and he can also get all of the gifts of chaos from every chaos god, What this really means for Be'lakor when we're thinking about demonic units is like he gets access to Bloodthirsters, Great Unclean Ones, Keeper of Secrets, Dragon Ogre Shagoffs, and Lord of Change during the course of his campaign. Much better and much easier than those dedicated factions of the Chaos Gods, those dedicated demonic factions have access to. He has the easiest access to them because starting with all those gifts is actually a significant amount of power, because usually if you want to get access to the gifts, well, if you're playing a monogod faction, it isn't really too big of an issue, but you'll only have access to that particular god's units. But if you're playing Undivided, then you generally need to spend quite a few turns to unlock, and that's only for one particular god. And even then, you still then have to spend the souls. Just starting with one gift slot for each of the Chaos Gods is actually a great deal of power during the campaign, and a great deal of flexibility when it comes to the gifts of Chaos. Now, I'm not gonna lie, this campaign, of course, can feel very, very, very easy in a lot of ways. It is powerful, but just because a campaign can be easy does not mean it can't be fun. And I think what's great about Be'lakor is that, yes, he is a powerful, certainly one of the most powerful Legendary Lords in the entire game. Absolutely, without a doubt in my mind. But at the same time, he's also a Legendary Lord that although he is powerful, he doesn't feel boring to play. He actually feels very fun to play because of the flexibility he has in the campaign, the customization of his armies, the customization of his lords, the ability to forcefully confederate the other warriors of Chaos. So you can get Sigvald, Valkia, Archeon, etc. Like, this campaign is what Be'lakor wishes he could be in the actual lore. Not what he is, because he's actually kind of pathetic in the actual lore, but he really lives up to a lot of the potential and actually a lot of the hype that the Realms of Chaos campaign built around him that, well, wasn't really realized in the Realms of Chaos campaign, but it is realized in Immortal Empire. So yeah, really fun campaign, great deal of power, great deal of flexibility in both unit types and where you decide to expand, how you decide to expand it, a lot of choices diplomatically even. So yeah, lots of options, lots of choices. A fairly dynamic campaign that you can play in a lot of different ways. And that's all there is to it. Costin here, signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications. If you do enjoy my content, consider supporting me via PayPal or Patreon or for YouTube channel membership. I always appreciate that. Stay tuned for more.